When it comes to guilt, a lot of people that I like and respect here on YouTube apparently disagree with me, which is fine. But because I like and respect these people, and respect their intellects and their opinions, I'm revisiting my premises, and for the life of me, I can't see where I've made an error. Now, that's okay, though. I'm an eccentric person, and eccentrics generally have this sort of, I don't know, almost unshakable belief that the world is out of step with them. So it's not really a big issue to me if everybody on the planet disagrees with me. I don't care. But that's not the issue. It's a little bit more tricky when you sort of like somebody and you respect their opinions and their minds and everything, and they still kind of disagree with you. It's not that I'm saying that I'm unrepentant, which I usually am. I'm usually just, whatever, you don't know what you're talking about type thing, but not in a nasty way. It's just, you haven't thought about it as deeply as I have. That's just the way an arrogant person thinks. It's for what it's worth. I'm not saying that that's an excuse, but so I've gone back and I've revisited sort of, I was doing my meditation and yoga last night, and I was thinking about that. Where have I perhaps misrepresented the entire phenomenon of guilt or missed something about it or whatever? And for the life of me, I cannot find where I may have done that. That, of course, could just as easily say something about me as opposed to everybody else. There is something to that saying that if 10 men tell you you're drunk, sit down. But in this case, I'm, in as much as I'm capable, I'm giving everybody else the benefit of the doubt, and I still can't agree. But what I did sort of do was, I sort of put myself backwards into the minds of people who, or attempted to, take the premises that everyone else seems to have, and sort of say, okay, let's go with these premises. Now, the less hostile view of guilt, which I think is the one that most people hold, and my view isn't necessarily hostile, it's just rather unforgiving, I guess. Unforgiving about guilt, isn't that an interesting concept? Where I say that it's coercion, it's violence when you inculcate it deliberately. And I'm not saying that it's bad because it's violence or whatever, but it's just like spanking an errant child. You have to bring a kid to book sometimes by punishing him or her. Whether you want to or not, it might be out of love that you do this, but you're still inflicting suffering. It's still aversion therapy. It's still Ludovico's treatment. But let's go with the more sympathetic view of guilt. Guilt is the feeling that you have when you violate your own principles, or you violate your own beliefs, or you do stuff that you believe was, I don't know, in some sense wrong. I don't know. Let's just sort of use that term the way it's used in the vernacular. Okay. Now, when you do that, just saying that when you violate your own principles or when you do something that you believe is wrong, what that means is that it is possible to do what you believe is wrong. There's an assumption built into that. Now, I would say, does that mean then that you believe that thing, or you know that that's wrong? Or is that you hope that it's wrong, or that you take it as an article of faith without thinking it through seriously, that it is quote-unquote wrong, or bad, or non-beneficial, or whatever, somehow negative? Do you actually believe that? Do you actually... Are you actually going against your own principles, or are you going against what you hope or believe your principles are? Again, in the vein of inner conflict, I would say again that we are many different things with many different polarities here. And if I sort of say, I believe X, or I don't know, in this case, say, I believe in non-harm. Let's say I believe in ahimsa or something along those lines. I believe in non-violence, non-harm, non-infliction of suffering, or whatever. Let's say that I say that, and it makes sense to me. Does all of me believe it? Let's examine that in the light of my idea of the multi-poled being that I am somewhat convinced that we all are. If I say that I believe in harm reduction. Do I believe it, or does part of me believe it, and part of me say, oh no, I don't believe in harm reduction? I actually either A, want to harm other things, or B, I'm not terribly interested if I harm things to get what I want. Inner conflict. Are beliefs actual beliefs, or are beliefs a declaration of war on part of ourselves? I'm not so sure of that, and again, when you feel that guilt, I would say that that's a sign of a recommencement of hostilities against the part of yourself that doesn't believe what you want to believe, or that what most of you believes, or whatever. I get that vibe all the time when I'm talking to Christians, which I do a lot, believe it or not. I almost feel like saying, okay, you spin a nice yarn, but do you actually believe all this? Oh, yes, I do. Oh, what a stupid question for me to ask. Well, they believe that they believe that they believe this, or they believe that they believe this. So what's the point of me asking them? I'm not going to get a straight answer out of them, even if they want to give me one, because they believe that they're giving me a straight answer. When I look at them and I sort of think, okay, I've seen you sort of take pleasure in, I don't know, things that are not exactly the most moral thing of all. Just little things, but they're just not charitable. They're not Christian. They're not nice. A little bit of triumphalism over somebody else, or a little bit of Schadenfreude or whatever. Just not nice stuff. Harmless, but definitely not on the plus side of human behavior. So, and they'll do this repeatedly, and hence the well-known reputation that the religious have for hypocrisy. All religious people, if you ask me, are hypocrites, because all humans are hypocrites. We couldn't be otherwise. Again, that's just an opinion. I'm not shoving that out there as a fact. It's just based on my consideration of the evidence. So, do people believe what they believe that they believe? That, to me, is almost the central question. And there's a fair amount of possibly egoism in saying that I believe this, because you want to be a good person. When you say that, let's say, I believe in Crusade X or whatever, let's not even caricature it. Let's just say that I believe I'm part of the Fur is Murder set, okay, which I kind of somewhat am, actually, but let's just say that I'm rather strident about it. Is there ego involved there? Do I want to be a moral person to set myself apart or above other people? It's possible. I had a minor to and fro with Gregory Sadler on this very subject. We've got a term in Eastern Canada called an old Puritan. Now, it's not really an insult, but it's not something you would say to somebody's face, at least not seriously. It's essentially, and if anyone has ever been around Protestant evangelicals, where they kind of sometimes ridicule a more extreme type of Protestant evangelical. Like, okay, yes, we're all pretty life-denying, or not life-denying, but we're self-denying. We're, self-discipline, a little bit of perfectionist attitude, this kind of thing. We don't smoke, drink, swear, that kind of thing. But this guy, he's a little bit extreme about it. That's what they would refer to as an old Puritan. It's not that it's really an insult. It's just like, oh, have another, piece of chocolate cake. No, don't be such an old Puritan. It's not going to kill you. Yes, we're not going to drink or anything like that or swear, and we go to church 5 times a week or whatever. But, come on, only an old Puritan would refuse another piece of cake. That's. And don't be such an old Puritan isn't an insult. It's just to say, look, relax. We know that we're all, very Christian here, but let's not go insane on it. And there's also, the thing about an old Puritan in the stereotype is that he's doing all the evangelical stuff for different reasons than most people are. Most people see it as a means to an end. He sees it as an end in itself. The sort of puritanical, religious stuff. He imposes guilt on other people because every time he tells himself that he's better than everybody else, and he might even say with considerable amount of egoism that I'm more moral than anybody else, or I'm more moral than the common run of people, or whatever. Pride, of course, arrogance, the whole bit. Believe me, I know all about that. And you have, what you think are virtues that are actually vices, but you've convinced yourself that they're virtues, yada, yada, yada. Just typical religious hypocrisy stuff. Love thy neighbor, yeah, sure. You're just using all the good stuff to prove how much better you are than the, people down there. That's an old Puritan. Somebody who just it's pretty joyless, their Christianity. It's all about denying yourself everything and being more moral than everybody else as an end in itself. So, is that really what we're doing when we say that we believe in something, and part of us rejects that? Part of us, I guess we call that the reptilian part. We want to have high ideals. We want to believe in the sublime. We want to make the world a better place. We want to do all of this. We do, yes, but only part of us does. The other part, or another part, wants no part of this. And guilt is the sort of stab that the quote-unquote good side gives to the bad side. Look, haven't we had this discussion before? I don't believe in indulging in the vice of gluttony, he says as he walks past a pastry shop with this lovely smell of fresh-baked croissant in the wind. Chocolate-covered croissant injected with Nutella. The Italian community here makes those. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with those. They're decadence itself. Nice sugar rush first thing in the morning. Now, what is the part of us that is tempted? What is the part of us that's likely to sort of weaken there? Does this part actually believe in conquering the flesh, the spirit conquering the flesh? Does this part actually go along with all of this idea of high ideals or whatever? Well, we're sinners, we have original sin, yada. That's the Christian view of the same thing. I don't think that atheist philosophy has kind of worked this out yet, this idea of compartments. I think Nietzsche came pretty close. In fact, he may have actually done it. I tend to read that into what he says, but whatever. But I do believe that, or I am convinced that, at this point in time, I get called out on using terms like good and bad, but I think people understand that the way in which I use them is on different levels. But anyway, my higher self says, from now on, I'm going to be a good person in this, that, or the other way. I'm going to have rigorous self-disciplines, self-control, all this sort of thing. But I'm walking down the street and I see a nice pair of thighs, and next thing you know, I'm doing or thinking something that my more sublime side doesn't like at all. Then the guilt is when the sublime side attacks the side that just indulged in all these fancies that it doesn't like, that the sublime side doesn't like. That's the inner conflict. That's what's going on when guilt is applied. You believe that your whole personality, your whole soul, I don't want to use that term, but your whole being actually wants to do good things, wants to be opposed to fur. But you see a fur coat and you feel envious of it. Whether you like it or not, you go, wow, that looks nice and warm. I live in an insanely cold country, or part of the country. And, okay, I can elaborately layer my clothes when I'm out for hours on end, which I often am, and I do elaborately layer my clothes, by the way. Jump through all these hoops to allow myself to meet my own standards or I can simply buy a fur coat. There's some sort of decision has to be made there. Which one am I going to do? Well, I disapprove of furs, so I just don't buy furs. It's quite simple, actually. Part of you says, yeah, but fur is warm, really warm. Like being outside with a nice, thick fur coat on, doesn't matter how cold it is, and you don't even have to move. You're going to stay warm. That's just a minor inner struggle, which I think that most people would find no difficulty in overcoming. But there's still some overcoming that has to take place. There's still some self-bludgeoning that has to take place. There's still some, look, I told you, I believe this, that has to take place. Every time that you go on a reducing diet and you walk past that pastry shop and smell the croissant, you've told yourself that you don't want to indulge in that kind of food. And you've told yourself that you will engage your will whenever the temptation comes along. What does that mean? Well, that's just physical temptation. What's being tempted? Are you saying that you don't have any influence over what your hands and your mouth and your stomach does? Of course you do. You can. Nothing's forcing you to walk into that shop and buy 6 of them and eat them all at once. Nothing has coerced you into doing that, or has it? And do you have to struggle against that somewhat coercive part of yourself that is saying, go get that? Because you can tell yourself, look, I have enough stored body fat. I'm not going to suffer any ill health effects by this feeling of this pang of hunger over the next few hours that my body is asking me to slake right now by eating a bunch of junk food. It's hard to call croissant junk food, but I suppose they are. What is going on there? Are you saying that your reptilian part isn't part of you? I would say it certainly is. And what do you do with that reptilian part of yourself? People say that, well, okay, you've got 2 choices here. You beat it down or you yield to it. Oh? Is that the only possible 2 choices? Are those the only 2 possible choices? I'm not sure that I agree with that. Again, we're back at that old question. Without guilt, we're all psychopaths. I don't think that we are all psychopaths without guilt. Maybe most of us will act in a psychopathic way or sociopathic way without guilt because we need some sort of knee-jerk trigger to stop us from doing things like this because we don't want to live an examined life and we just want to figure out a quick way to avoid doing bad or violating our own principles or what we tell ourselves are our own principles or what we decide are our own principles. Do we actually adhere in a fundamental sense to our own principles? I would say that it's very possible that we most certainly do not, in a fundamental sense. And I'm big on self-discipline. I'm always on about it. But one thing that you learn about self-discipline is it's not about brutally bludgeoning yourself into submission. You can use guilt and shame on yourself as much as you like. And again, in Catholic school, you're taught to do that. You're taught the wonderful techniques of self-repression. But again, it's not just Catholicism that's known for that. The Protestant extreme types are known as, just as innerly conflicted as the most neurotic Catholic. Jewish guilt is different, but it's along the same lines. You want to be a good member of the team, but part of you wants to just think of yourself. How dare you think of yourself when your community is all that should really matter to you? Yada, yada, yada. So it's not that I'm unrepentant, it's just that I honestly can't see how guilt can be seen any other way than coercion and inner warfare. And an inner warfare that you can't win, that neither side can win. It's just inner conflict. It's not And not only that, it doesn't even result in anything remotely resembling ethical or moral behavior. Well, I suppose you can say it resembles it because it looks on the outside like the person is being moral or ethical, but they're simply being coerced into doing it. They've turned their being into a robot that does whatever one part of the body says, in spite of the massive protests from the other side of their being, or another side of their being. Even religion admits this. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I don't think it's between spirit and flesh at all. Maybe reptilian versus higher brain, but I think that it's not even that. I think it's simply two bits of the same being that are in conflict. And I think that it's not a resolvable conflict. If you want to take just a consequentialist position, fine. You get the end result that you want. If the end result is that the behavior is all that matters, regardless of the cost in terms of inner conflict. In a sense, I think that guilt is kind of a lazy thing. It's kind of a restraining bolt like they have in Star Wars that you put on a droid and just stops them from doing anything they're not supposed to do. It just removes the physical ability to do that. And that's Ludovico's treatment from A Clockwork Orange again. It doesn't make the person good. It doesn't make the person bad. It just means that the person has now, in a sense, abdicated, or had it done for them, their ability to choose morally. Which leaves the question open, which Vic Mackey asks me. How else do we get people to act morally? Well, I would say back up a bit. Are you really so sure that you're moral? Does all of you agree with this idea that you have about, I don't know, say veganism? To quote Tony Vega, pork chop tastes good, bacon tastes good, type thing. What is a temptation? Let's not look at it from the Christian or Catholic point of view. What's a temptation from the point of view of someone who's attempting to, say, I don't know, be a gooder person or reduce the amount of harm in the world? There was a pretty ridiculous video a while back about my vegetarian contradictions, or my vegetarian backsliding, or something like this, where everybody came on and confessed that they'd eaten a steak 2 months ago, or something like this. Oh boy. And these are self-proclaimed atheists. They were actually ethelists. I would say that humans do that a lot. I always pillory my own fellow Canadians as being massive hypocrites. But that's kind of unfair. We all are. It's just, I think Canadians have this smug sense of superiority over everybody else that allows them to just sort of bury that bit in there, which, it comes out every time a Canadian acts spectacularly stupid, and Canadians are all embarrassed by this. The no good Scotsman thing, or no true Scotsman. Let's just say, and I'm not picking on you, Vic, I'm just using you as a sort of an example. You say that you're into harm reduction, or whatever your motivation is for, say, spreading vegetarianism or veganism, or wanting to talk about it, or, unfortunately, what I would call proselytism. But that's another debate. You say that you want to do that, and you say you want to do it for the right reasons. How do you know you do? Seriously. I would say, first of all, you can't prove to me that you're doing that for non-egoistic reasons. That's okay, though. I think we all know that whenever you get into a sort of ethical sort of discussion, or whatever you want to call this, when it's harm reduction. It's that possibility always rears its head. Are you just being holier than thou? No, I'm not. Okay, you're telling me that, and I'll have to watch your actions to see whether or not they match your words. Chances are, 99 times out of 100, they might. But there's that 1%. How do you explain that? How do you explain that one time in 100 when you didn't adhere to your most basic principles? What happened there? Who did that? Who did that thing? That one act in 100 that goes completely contrary to all of your principles. What did that? Who did that? How did that happen? Then I would say you mostly believe in harm reduction. Not completely. And when that happens, I think the inner conflict is enormous. When you see yourself violating what you think are your own principles. It goes back to Schopenhauer, can we will what we will? It's a very multifaceted question, that. He says that we can't. I kind of agree with him, but I kind of don't. We can will what we will, but you can't will it as a matter of policy. I'll put it that way.